"You're too emotional for real power." That's what Jason Mercer said, standing at the head of the mahogany boardroom table in front of 11 people who said nothing. He signed her termination with a gold fountain pen. Slow, deliberate. Then he picked up the diamond ring she had worn for 2 years, held it up to the fluorescent light, and slid it across the polished table like a chip he was done playing. It hit the edge and stopped. Olivia's ink-stained notebook sat open in front of her, filled with the original code that had built everything in this room. She didn't reach for the ring. She didn't reach for her notebook. She slid one hand into her bag and her fingers closed around the edge of a plain red folder that Jason had never once noticed sitting in the open wall safe behind him.
Wrong move. He just sold $1 billion lie on live television. Let's get into it.
The heavy glass doors of the Apex Event Center were locked from the inside, shutting Olivia out in the freezing rain. Through the towering windows, she watched Jason standing on the glittering stage, bathing in the applause of 500 elite investors. He adjusted his custom-tailored Italian suit. He flashed his signature arrogant smile. He raised his hand to ring the golden IPO bell. Beside him stood Jessica, wearing the exact diamond engagement ring Jason had torn from Olivia's finger just 48 hours ago. They were moments away from cashing in $1 billion on a tech company they had violently stolen from her. Olivia's deactivated plastic ID badge lay broken in the mud at her feet. Her body trembled against the cold glass. Jason didn't know the woman standing in the rain wasn't locked out. She was just waiting for the trap to snap shut. The meeting notice arrived at 6 a.m. It was brief, cold, and unsigned. Olivia stared at the single line on her screen. Her coffee went cold beside her keyboard. She had built that boardroom from a rented garage and 3 credit cards. She had written the original algorithm in a notebook with a cracked spine and a leaking pen. She told herself it was nothing. She dressed carefully. She went in. The boardroom smelled of cedar and expensive ambition. 12 board members sat along the polished mahogany table. None of them looked at her when she entered. That was the first sign. Olivia set her fraying notebook on the table. The cover was ink-stained soft at the corners, warped from years of being carried in the rain. She pulled out her chair. She sat down. She waited. Jason entered 4 minutes late. He was unhurried, deliberate, fully composed. His Italian suit caught the morning light. His Rolex caught it too. He did not greet her. He moved to the head of the table and opened a leather portfolio, slim, black, and gleaming. He clicked his pen once. It was a gold fountain pen, heavy and custom, worth more than the laptop Olivia had coded the company's first product on. "We're calling this meeting," Jason said. He looked at the board. He did not look at her. "To formalize a necessary transition in leadership." Olivia's hands stayed flat on the table. She did not move them. The board counsel cleared his throat. He slid a document across the surface toward Olivia. The paper landed with a soft final sound. She looked at it without touching it. The words were precise and surgical. Board Resolution 44A, Restructuring of Executive Authority. Immediate effect. She had seen similar language before in contracts she had drafted herself. She had never expected to see it aimed at her. "There's a legal mechanism embedded in the original shareholder agreement," Jason said. He paused. He glanced at the council, not at Olivia. "Section 14, subsection C. Majority vote removes the founding executive in the event of a strategic realignment. We have the votes." Olivia looked at the faces along the table. Most of them were still. One man, Hargreave, the lead investor, and the oldest voice on the board, sat with his eyes fixed on his own hands. His jaw was tight. He did not look up. She held that detail. "You need a 60% majority," Olivia said. Her voice was even, measured, fully controlled. "We have it," Jason replied. The vote was called. It was quick. It was decisive. It was over before Olivia could finish counting the raised hands. 7 out of 11. The room felt smaller after that. The air thinned. Hargreave never raised his hand. He never looked up either. Jason reached into his jacket. He pulled out the diamond engagement ring. He set it on the table without ceremony. It struck the mahogany with a sharp, cold clink. The sound was small, precise, and devastating. Olivia felt it move through her chest like a current. She did not flinch. She did not look at the ring. She kept her eyes on Jason's face. "You were never built for this," he said. He smiled, easy, practiced, and entirely without shame. "Too emotional for real power. That's not an insult. It's just a fact." He gestured toward the door. "Security will escort you out. Jessica will be assuming the co-executive role effective today." Jessica stepped forward from the side wall. She had been standing there the entire time. Olivia had not noticed her. That was the second sign and the worst one. Jessica wore a tailored navy blazer. She wore Olivia's ring on her left hand. She wore a small, careful smile that she had clearly been practicing. Olivia stood. She picked up her notebook. She did not pick up the ring. She did not speak to Jessica. She looked at Jason for exactly 1 moment, long enough to see his satisfaction and short enough to give him nothing. She turned toward the door. Behind her, Jason uncapped his gold pen. He signed her termination document with slow, visible pleasure. The scratching sound of the nib on paper was quiet and permanent. She passed the open wall safe near the door. The facilities team had not yet changed the combination. A plain red folder sat inside, unmarked flush against the left side. Olivia slid it into her purse in a single, unhurried motion. Jason was still talking behind her, something about synergy and bold new directions, something aimed at the board members and not at her. He was already finished with her. He did not see her hand move at all. The elevator doors closed. Olivia stood alone inside it. The polished metal reflected her back to herself, blurred in silver. She pressed the lobby button. She held the notebook against her chest with both hands. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, and private. One question moved through her mind, quiet and persistent. Hargreave had refused to raise his hand. He had kept his eyes down the entire time, fixed on his own fingers, like a man studying evidence against himself. She had begged briefly and quietly for a fair procedural review before the vote. He had heard her. He had said nothing. Why Jason smiled at the closed elevator doors across the empty boardroom, certain he had stripped her of everything. He did not know she had just walked out carrying the match to burn his life down. The penthouse lobby smelled of cut flowers and cold marble. Olivia pushed through the glass entrance doors. The doorman looked at her once. He looked away. That was enough. She crossed the lobby without stopping. She rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The doors opened and the hallway was wrong. 3 black garbage bags sat outside the apartment door. They were cheap, thin-walled plastic, the kind sold in bulk at discount stores. They bulged at the seams. One had already split at the side, spilling a cascade of design sketches across the hallway floor. Olivia crouched down. She picked up a single sheet. It was a hand-drawn wireframe, annotated in blue pen dated 4 years ago. Her handwriting, her first interface prototype. Her hands stayed steady. She tried her keycard. The reader blinked red. She tried again. Red. She pressed her palm flat against the door and stood there a moment, her forehead nearly touching the wood. Then she straightened. She picked up the split bag. She set it upright against the wall. She checked the other 2. Her clothes were inside the first, compressed and wrinkled, no hangers. Her laptop charger was missing. The second bag held books, toiletries, and a broken picture frame. The glass had cracked clean across the center, bisecting a photograph of Olivia at the original office launch, standing beside the banner she had hand-painted herself. The third bag held nothing she recognized. Someone had packed it wrong. Someone had packed it fast. A sound came from above, laughter bright and deliberate shape to carry. Olivia stepped back and looked up. The balcony of the penthouse level extended above the lobby entrance, wide and lit from inside. Jessica stood at the railing. She held a stack of papers loosely in one hand. Olivia's remaining design sketches bound with a rubber band that she snapped free with one finger. She held them out over the railing. She opened her hand. The pages scattered. They caught the evening wind, separating, instantly spinning outward over the gated driveway below. Some caught the iron fence. Most did not. They settled onto the wet street, pale and useless, pressed flat by the first drops of the coming rain. The freezing air bit through Olivia's blouse. It was cheap cotton thin at the collar, never meant for this kind of cold. Her arms were bare. She did not move. "You should have taken a better deal when he offered," Jessica called down. Her voice was clear, composed, and casual. She leaned against the railing. "He was generous, honestly, given what you actually contributed." Olivia said nothing. "The accounts are frozen, by the way." Jessica tilted her head. "All three, including the personal one. His lawyers are thorough." She smiled at that. It was a small, satisfied, entirely private smile. "You might want to find somewhere dry to sleep tonight." The heavy iron gates at the base of the driveway swung shut. The mechanism was automatic, precise, and expensive. The sound it made was final, a deep clang that rolled off the marble facade and dissolved into the wet street. Jessica watched it close from the balcony. Then she turned and walked back inside. Olivia stood on the pavement. The rain arrived properly now, not heavy, just persistent and cold, the kind that soaks through cotton in under 2 minutes. Her life reduced to 3 garbage bags and a scatter of wet paper sat against a pristine gated marble driveway worth more than her family home. She looked at the iron gate. She looked at the bags. She did not look at the balcony again. She crouched beside the split bag. She reached into the lining of her left shoe. Her fingers found the small rectangle of plastic tucked flat against the inner sole. A prepaid burner phone, cheap and scratched, purchased 6 weeks ago in a convenience store 3 subway stops from the office. She had not told Jason about it. She had not told anyone. She powered it on. The screen was dim, cracked at one corner and entirely functional. She typed a string of numbers. It was not a message. It was not a name. It was a sequence, compressed and specific, the kind that means something only if you already know what it means. She hit send. She powered the screen down. She slid the phone back into the lining of her shoe. She stood up. The rain fell steadily on her bare arms. She did not feel it the way she expected to. She felt the cold, sharp and accurate against her skin, and she felt the wet cotton of her blouse pulling heavy at her shoulders. But underneath that, something else was running. Quiet, parallel, entirely separate from the cold. The burner phone vibrated once against the sole of her foot. She did not check it. She already knew what it said. She had written the protocol herself. A man in a dark coat walked past the gate without stopping. He did not look at her. A car moved slowly through the street, its headlights sweeping across the wet pavement, catching the scattered design sketches in a brief, indifferent light before moving on. Olivia pulled one of the garbage bags upright. She began to walk. She did not look back at the penthouse. She did not look up at the empty balcony. One thing stayed with her, persistent and precise. The recipient of the encrypted text had replied in under 40 seconds. The message was a single word, confirmed, no name, no question, no instruction needed. Whoever had sent that reply had been waiting. They had been waiting for a long time. Jessica laughed somewhere above the sealed gates of the elite estate, relaxed, unhurried, and entirely certain. She believed the game was finished. She believed the prize was hers, clean and permanent and uncontested. She believed the woman walking away through the rain had nothing left to use. The gates had closed. The accounts were frozen. The sketches were wet. She had no idea what she had just confirmed. The city did not stop for her. It never did. Olivia moved through it anyway, 1 block at a time, her garbage bag traded for a single backpack she had retrieved from the split lining of the largest bag before leaving the driveway. It held her notebook, the burner phone, and $40 in small bills she kept folded behind her transit card. That was the inventory. That was everything. The first internet cafe was on a side street off the financial district, sandwiched between a closed laundromat and a place that sold phone cases and lottery tickets. The fluorescent bulb above the terminal flickered twice when she sat down. It buzzed at an irregular frequency, not quite a rhythm, just noise. She ignored it. She logged in under a guest account. She began. She did not search her own name. She did not search Omnitech. She opened 3 encrypted relay windows and routed her traffic through servers in 2 different countries before touching anything that mattered. She had built the original security architecture for the company's data infrastructure. She knew exactly where the gaps were. She knew exactly which gaps Jason had never thought to close because he had never understood them to begin with. She worked for 90 minutes. She moved to a second cafe 4 blocks north, smaller and darker, the terminals older. She ordered coffee from the counter. It came in a paper cup burnt and thin, scalded from sitting too long on a cheap heating element. She drank it standing up. It was bitter. It scorched the back of her throat on the way down. She drank it anyway. She had been awake for 36 hours. She needed another 12. The second terminal was slower. She worked around it. She was assembling something, not a weapon, not yet, but a net. Invisible threads, patient and deliberate, spreading outward from her fingertips across the digital architecture of a company that no longer recognized her name. She moved carefully. She left nothing she did not intend to leave. Across the city, Jason was standing in front of cameras. The press conference was held in the Omnitech lobby, the one Olivia had redesigned 2 years ago, with a glass ceiling and a custom lighting rig that cost 4 months of operating budget. It looked extraordinary on camera. It was supposed to. Jason stood at the center of it in a charcoal suit, fresh and composed, his Rolex catching the light with every gesture. He smiled the way he always smiled in public, broad, confident, and entirely self-authored. "This algorithm," he said. He paused for the cameras. "Was built from a vision I've held for nearly a decade." He touched the podium with one hand, easy and proprietary. "The architecture, the core logic, the scaling model, all of it came from a very specific way of seeing what data infrastructure could become." He looked directly into the center camera. "I'm proud of what we've built, and I'm proud to bring it to the public market." The journalists wrote it down, the photographers captured the smile. The footage went live on 6 financial networks within the hour. Olivia watched 12 seconds of it on the terminal screen before closing the window. She had heard enough. She had in fact heard exactly what she needed. She moved to a third cafe before midnight. This one had a hand-lettered sign in the window and 2 working terminals out of 5. She took the one in the back corner facing the wall. The chair wobbled. She wedged a folded napkin under the short leg. She sat down. She kept working. The net was not finished, but it was taking shape. 41 nodes distributed and silent, each one carrying a fragment of something larger that would only become visible when all of them activated at once. She had designed systems like this before. She had designed this specific one before in a different context for a different purpose years ago. She had always known it might need a second use. Outside on the wide avenue that fronted the Apex Event Center, a sleek black town car sat parked along the opposite curb. It had been there since early evening. Its engine was off. Its windows were dark. No one went in or out. A valet from the event center had knocked on the glass once politely to ask if the driver needed assistance. The window had lowered 2 inches. A hand had produced a card. The valet had walked away quickly and not come back. The town car belonged to Arthur Bellamy. Olivia did not know he was there yet. She would not know until Chapter 5. But the car did not move. It sat in the dark, patient and deliberate, watching the front entrance of a venue that would not open its doors for another 22 hours. Olivia left the third cafe at 2 in the morning. The street was quiet. She found a 24-hour diner 6 blocks east and ordered water and a side of toast. She sat in the last booth. She opened her notebook. She wrote 3 lines in the margin of a page dated 5 years ago, small and precise, next to a diagram of a data routing system she had drawn by hand on a Tuesday afternoon when the company was still operating out of a rented garage. She capped her pen. She looked at the window. Rain moved across the glass in slow, irregular channels. One question had been following her since the boardroom. It was not about Jason. It was not about the vote or the legal mechanism or the gold fountain pen scratching across her termination. It was about her own lawyers. She had 3 on retainer. 2 had worked with her for years, reliable and sharp. She had not called any of them. She had not sent a single message. Every instinct she had told her to reach for that resource, and every time she reached, something stopped her hand. She knew why. She just wasn't ready to say it yet. The world believed Jason Masters was a self-made tech visionary. The financial networks were running his face on a loop. The algorithm was being described in print and on air as his singular architectural achievement. His name was on everything. Her name was on nothing anyone could currently see. The real architect was sitting in a diner booth at 2 a.m. eating dry toast and quietly building his coffin from the inside out.
Absolutely not. He stole her life's work, threw her belongings in the trash, and paraded her best friend as his new bride. If that were me, I would have lost my mind in that penthouse. Imagine watching the person you loved steal your billion-dollar empire while everyone claps. The audacity is real.
The Apex Event Center dressed itself for money, the way only buildings built entirely for money know how to do. Every surface caught light and returned. It amplified the marble floors, the brushed brass fixtures, the towering atrium glass that turned the evening sky into a backdrop. Limousines arrived in sequence. Doors opened. Men in tailored suits stepped out unhurried and deliberate the way men move when they have never once been asked to hurry for anyone. Women in structured gowns followed. Valets moved the cars without being told twice. Olivia stood on the pavement across the street. Her cotton blouse had dried unevenly from the night before. It sat stiff at the shoulders and soft at the hem. Her slacks were creased in the wrong places. She had washed her face in a diner bathroom at 6 a.m. and combed her hair with her fingers. She looked exactly like what Jason had called her, a desperate beggar. She crossed the street anyway. The velvet ropes were burgundy heavy and precisely positioned. They divided the entrance into 2 clear zones, the arriving elite on one side and everything else on the other. 2 security personnel stood at the main doors, broad-suited and entirely uninterested in nuance. Olivia approached the rope. She did not touch it. She gave her name clearly and without apology. The guard on the left checked a tablet. He checked it twice. He looked at her once unhurried and dismissive. "Not on the list," he said. "I founded the company whose IPO you're securing tonight," Olivia said. Her voice was even measured and precisely controlled. He looked at the tablet again, not because he doubted himself, but because looking at the tablet was more comfortable than looking at her. "Not on the list," he repeated. She asked to speak with the event coordinator. She was told the coordinator was unavailable. She asked for a manager. She was told the same thing in different words. Behind her, another limousine pulled up. The doors opened. The velvet rope lifted. 3 men in suits walked through without breaking stride. The heavy, suffocating scent of expensive cigars drifted past her as the men entered, thick and sweet and entirely indifferent. One of them glanced at her sideways as he passed. He looked away before she could hold his gaze. His laughter, low and private, drifted back through the open doors before they swung shut again. Jason appeared at the glass doors 10 minutes later. He had been told apparently that someone was causing a disturbance at the entrance. He came to look. He came because he wanted to. He pushed one door open with a single flat hand and stood in the warmth of the lobby, the golden light of the atrium behind him, his suit immaculate, his expression arranged into something between amusement and contempt. Olivia. He said her name the way someone names a stray animal that has wandered onto their property. He tilted his head. "You came." She looked at him. She did not speak. "You can't be here," he said. He was speaking loudly enough for the security team to hear. Loudly enough for the arriving guests nearest the entrance to hear. That was deliberate. Everything Jason did in public was deliberate. "This is a private event for investors." He paused. He let that land. "Not former employees." Behind him, through the glass, the ballroom glittered. 500 people moved through it in slow, expensive orbits. An orchestra played something light and celebratory at the far end of the hall. The golden IPO bell sat on a velvet stand at the center of the stage, heavy and gleaming, waiting. "You should go home," Jason said. His smile arrived then. easy, practiced, and symmetric. Wherever that is, the security guard stepped forward. He did not touch her. He did not need to. He simply repositioned himself between Olivia and the door with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before and found it entirely unremarkable. The message was architectural. There was no door for her here. Olivia stood in the rain. It had started again, quiet and steady, the same rain that had followed her for 2 days, patient and cold, and entirely without sympathy. The velvet ropes glistened. The marble steps darkened. The guests arriving behind her moved around her the way water moves around a fixed point automatically without acknowledgement. Jason watched her for another moment. Then he turned. He walked back toward the stage. He did not look over his shoulder. He was already finished with her the way he had been finished with her in the boardroom, the way he would always be finished with people the moment they stopped being useful. Olivia reached into her shoe. She pulled the burner phone free and looked at the screen. The digital timer she had set 40 hours ago displayed a single row of zeros. Every digit read 0. The sequence had completed. She looked at the timestamp below it. The network had confirmed activation 3 minutes ago, silent and invisible, distributed across 41 nodes she had seeded through 3 nights of work in flickering internet cafes. She powered the screen off. She slid the phone back into her shoe. She stood in the rain outside a billion-dollar event she was not permitted to enter in a blouse that cost less than the cigars the men inside were smoking, and she breathed slowly. The applause from inside was audible through the glass. It moved in waves, building and collapsing and building again, the sound of 500 people celebrating a man who had never written a single line of the code they were applauding. The glass walls of the Apex Event Center vibrated faintly with it. Olivia pressed one hand flat against the cold glass. She felt the vibration move through her palm. One question remained sharp and unresolved. The 2 security guards had moved closer together when Jason left. They had not said anything further, but their posture had changed, tighter and more deliberate. She had read that shift before in people preparing for an instruction they expected to receive at any moment. If that instruction came, if Jason had already made the call, she would not be escorted away. She would be arrested. The storm outside the glass doors was already louder than anything happening inside. No one in that building could hear it yet. The guard's hand landed on her shoulder. It was not gentle. It was not intended to be. The push was short, controlled, and entirely practiced, the kind of force applied by someone who understands exactly how much pressure removes a person without leaving a mark. Olivia's heel caught the wet edge of the marble step. She went backward. The pavement came up fast and cold and unyielding, and she hit it with her left palm and both knees hard enough to feel the impact move up through her wrists and into her shoulders. She stayed down for a moment. Not because she could not get up, because the body sometimes needs one honest second before it decides what to do next. The rain fell on the back of her neck. It ran cold along her collar and soaked through the cotton of her blouse in the precise, indifferent way water always finds the path of least resistance. Her left palm was bleeding a thin, bright line across the heel of her hand, where the pavement had opened the skin. She looked at it. She pressed it flat against her slacks. She looked up. The guards had already turned away. The glass doors were already closed. Through them, the ballroom glittered on, unchanged and indifferent, 500 people suspended in amber light, none of them watching the woman on the wet pavement outside. Olivia sat on the asphalt. The cold moved through her knees and up into her hips. Her torn, mud-stained slacks absorbed the puddle water slowly. She did not move yet. She sat with her back to the event center and looked at the empty street in front of her. The dark, wet road, the distant traffic signals cycling through their colors for no one in particular. This was the part no one prepared you for, not the betrayal itself, not the moment in the boardroom when the votes were raised and the diamond ring hit the mahogany and the gold pen scratched across your name. Not even the garbage bags on the driveway or the pages scattering in the wind. Those moments were terrible, but they were legible. They had edges. They could be named. This was different. This was the aftermath of the aftermath. This was sitting on wet asphalt outside a building you built, bleeding from your palm, wearing a blouse that had never been expensive enough to matter, and understanding with complete clarity that the world had simply continued. The orchestra was still playing inside. The investors were still circling. The golden bell was still waiting on its velvet stand. The machine kept running. It did not require her to be standing to keep running. She had trusted him. That was the sentence she kept returning to, not with anger anymore, just with a kind of exhausted precision. She had trusted him with the algorithm, with the architecture, with the original code that she had written in a notebook with a cracked spine at 2 a.m. in a garage that smelled of solder and cold coffee. She had trusted him with the company, and with her name, and with the ring he had placed on her finger in front of people who had clapped. She had trusted a man who had been preparing a legal trap for at minimum 18 months, who had embedded a clause in the original shareholder agreement before the ink was dry on their partnership, who had smiled at her across boardroom tables while counting votes she did not know were already decided. The corporate world did not punish that kind of intelligence. It rewarded it. It put it on stages and gave it golden bells to ring. She thought about her lawyers, the 3 she had not called. She understood now, sitting on the pavement, why her hand had stopped every time she reached. 2 of them had been introduced to her through Jason. Their retainer agreements ran through the company's legal account. The company's legal account was no longer hers. She was not certain whose side they were currently on. She was not willing to find out the wrong way. The 3rd lawyer was different, independent, careful, and entirely her own. She had not called him because she was not ready to use that card yet. Because once you use a card, it is used. Because timing, as her father had told her once in a very different context, is the only resource that cannot be recovered once spent. She pressed her bleeding palm harder against her slacks. She breathed. She looked at the street. She had been stripped of her title. She had been stripped of her home, her accounts, her access, and her name on the door of the building she had designed from the framing studs outward. She had been publicly called a desperate beggar by the man who had proposed to her on a Tuesday morning with orange juice and no particular ceremony because he had said she would prefer it that way. She had been pushed onto wet asphalt in front of 500 people who had not noticed. And yet, the 41 nodes were live, the net was active, the red folder was in her bag. The encrypted text had been confirmed 40 hours ago by someone who had been waiting patient and prepared for exactly this signal. She did not know yet what shape the next hour would take. That was honest. She was not going to pretend otherwise, not here, not on the pavement, not to herself. The sound arrived before the light did. A deep, synchronized vibration moved through the wet asphalt beneath her hands, low and resonant, and unmistakably mechanical. Then the headlights came around the corner, not one pair but many, sweeping in a wide arc across the rain-soaked street, illuminating everything they touched with the cold, precise brilliance of halogen. The convoy moved slowly. It moved with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of something that does not need to rush because it has already decided the outcome. Black SUVs, 4 of them, 5, 6. They pulled to the curb in a single, fluid sequence. The engines cut. The doors opened. The synchronized thud of heavy doors closing sent a clean vibration through the pavement and up through Olivia's bleeding hands. A man stepped out of the 3rd vehicle. He was older, silver-haired, and dressed in a dark overcoat that had been made for him specifically. He looked at Olivia on the pavement without surprise and without pity. He looked at her the way someone looks at a situation they have been briefed on thoroughly and have already decided how to resolve. Arthur Bellamy had not arrived. He had deployed. Bellamy did not offer his hand. He looked at Olivia on the pavement, assessed the bleeding palm, the torn slacks, the soaked cotton blouse, and gave a single curt nod. Not sympathy. Acknowledgement. She pushed herself upright without assistance. She stood. Her knees were wet and her palm was still bleeding, and she was entirely steady. Behind Bellamy, the SUV doors were still opening. Men and women in dark coats stepped out in pairs, purposeful and unhurried. Press vans materialized from the alleyways flanking the event center. sliding forward from positions they had held in silence since early evening. Bellamy had parked them there 20 at a time in 6 separate alley approaches during the window between midnight and 4 in the morning, while Olivia worked in flickering internet cafes and Jason slept in a penthouse that did not belong to him yet. 200 journalists. Their cameras were already live. Olivia reached into her bag. She took out the red folder. It was plain unmarked and slightly damp at one corner from 2 days inside a bag that had sat in the rain. She held it at her side. She looked at the glass doors of the Apex Event Center. She looked at the guards inside, who were now looking back at the convoy with an entirely different posture than they had held 20 minutes ago. Bellamy spoke 4 words to the guard nearest the entrance. The guard stepped aside. The doors opened. The warmth of the ballroom came out first. Then the light. Then the sound, the orchestra mid-phrase, 500 conversations layered over crystal and champagne, and the ambient confidence of people who have never once doubted their right to be in a room. None of it stopped immediately. The room required a moment to understand what had entered it. Olivia walked in. She was bleeding soaked and composed with a stillness that was not calm exactly, but something more precise than calm. Something that had been filed down to its sharpest possible edge over 48 hours of rain and pavement and flickering fluorescent light. Bellamy walked beside her. 200 journalists followed cameras' live feeds running the footage, already transmitting to networks that had been primed and waiting since Chapter 3. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The silence arrived completely absolute and clean, the way silence only arrives when every sound in a large room is cut at once. In that silence, Jason's breathing was audible, not loud, just present, ragged and sudden and entirely uncontrolled, a man whose blood had just run cold, understanding in real time what cold blood actually means. Jason stood on the stage. He still held the golden bell handle. His hand had not released it. His Rolex caught the stage lights the same way it had caught them all evening. His suit was still perfect. None of the external facts of him had changed in the last 30 seconds. Everything else had. Jessica stood beside him. She was wearing Olivia's ring. She had been smiling at the nearest camera 30 seconds ago. She was not smiling now. She was very still, the kind of still that precedes a specific kind of collapse. Olivia walked to the center of the room. She did not walk to the stage. She did not raise her voice. She stood on the ballroom floor among the investors, equidistant from the exits, and she opened the red folder. The documents inside were clean, precise, and dated. The core algorithm, the one Jason had described to the press that morning as his singular architectural achievement, the one built from a vision he had held for nearly a decade, was not his. It had never been his. Olivia had filed for trademark protection on the underlying architecture 14 months ago, under the name of a personal holding company that Jason had never been informed existed. The filing was complete, registered, and entirely legal. The trademark was active. Omnitech had just sold 500 investors' shares in a company whose core product it did not own. Olivia did not shout this. She stated it. Her voice was level, clear, and precisely calibrated for a room of this size. She held up the primary document. The cameras caught it. The feeds carried it. Bellamy's legal team moved through the crowd, distributing certified copies to the nearest investors, 12 packets pre-prepared, each one tabbed and annotated. The room understood before she finished speaking. An investor near the front, gray-haired, heavyset, and wearing the expression of a man who has been defrauded before and recognizes the specific flavor of it, turned to the man beside him and said something short and sharp that Olivia did not need to hear to understand. A second investor pulled out his phone. A third moved toward the exit. The movement began as individuals and became a current within 90 seconds. Jason released the bell handle. His hand dropped to his side. His mouth opened and closed, once the beginning of something, a rebuttal, a redirect, a version of events that would require the room to disbelieve what it was currently holding in its hands. The rebuttal did not arrive. What arrived instead was the specific total blankness of a man whose single blind spot has just become visible to him for the first time. He had known Olivia was intelligent. He had never once considered that her intelligence had been working in a direction he could not see. Jessica made a sound. It was small and involuntary and not quite a word. She looked at the ring on her left hand. She looked at Olivia. Something moved across her face, something complicated and layered that had been building since the boardroom, since she had stood against the wall in a tailored blazer and watched a diamond ring strike a mahogany table and chosen to say nothing. She was the one who had been there. She was the one who had watched and stayed quiet. She had been present at the wound. She was present at the payoff. That was not a coincidence. Olivia had always known it would end in front of the same witness. Near the back of the room, just inside the doors, Hargreaves stood with his arms at his sides. He had come to the IPO launch because he was on the board and attendance was expected. He had spent the evening holding a glass of champagne he had not drunk. When Olivia had walked in, bleeding and steady, he had looked at her the way he had looked at his own hands in the boardroom 48 hours ago. Like a man confronting the cost of a silence he had chosen. He did not look away this time. The red folder, plain and unmarked and slightly damp, sat open in Olivia's hands like a king holding a sword, and Jason's billion-dollar stage had become, in the span of 90 seconds, a very expensive, very public, and entirely hollow piece of theater. His arrogant smirk had dissolved. What replaced it was something she had never seen on his face before, something unguarded and genuine and entirely too late. Jason Masters had built his empire on a foundation he did not own. He had just confirmed it on camera in front of 500 witnesses to 200 journalists whose feeds were already live. He had rung the bell himself. She had simply made sure the world was listening when he did. The first investor to move was the gray-haired man near the front. He did not run. He walked quickly and with purpose toward the nearest exit, his phone already at his ear, his voice low and controlled and entirely serious. The man beside him followed, then 3 more. Then the current became unmistakable. A room of 500 people reorganizing itself around a single new fact, the way water reorganizes around a drain, inevitable and accelerating. The SEC agents entered through the service entrance. There were 11 of them, suited and badged, moving in pairs through the crowd, with the calm efficiency of people executing a plan that had been prepared long before tonight. They did not push. They did not raise their voices. They moved to the stage with the kind of quiet authority that does not require volume because it has already decided the outcome. Jason watched them come. He stood at the center of the stage, still holding nothing, his hand hanging at his side where the bell handle used to be. His suit was still perfect. His Rolex still caught the light. He was still externally the same man who had walked into a boardroom 48 hours ago and signed a termination document with a $5,000 gold pen. The external facts had not changed. Everything underneath them had collapsed entirely. The lead agent reached the stage steps. He was brief. He was professional. He stated Jason's name and the charges in a voice calibrated for clarity, not drama, federal wire fraud, securities fraud, and fraudulent inducement of investment. Each charge landed in the silence of the room like something dropped from a significant height. Jason said nothing. His mouth opened once. It closed. He looked at Olivia standing on the ballroom floor below the stage, the red folder still open in her hands, her bleeding palm leaving a faint, rust-colored mark on the lower corner of the document. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in 4 years of knowing him. Not anger, not contempt. Something rawer than either. The look of a man who has just understood completely and too late that he had been operating inside someone else's architecture the entire time. The handcuffs were standard issue, dull iron, cold, and functional. They closed over his wrists with a short, definitive sound. The left cuff caught the edge of his Rolex on the way down, scratching a clean line across the imported glass face. The sound was small. In the silence of the room, it was very clear. Jessica had not moved from her position beside the stage. She had stood there through the arrival of the journalists, through Olivia's statement, through the investors pulling their funding and moving toward the exits, through the SEC agents crossing the floor. She had stood very still and very straight, the way a person stands when movement feels dangerous. When a second agent approached her, she did not speak. She looked at the badge. She looked at the document he extended. Her hands began to shake. The diamond ring was removed from her finger by a female officer carefully and without force as part of the evidence inventory. Jessica's hand, bare and trembling, dropped to her side. She made a sound, then high and broken and entirely genuine, the sound of a person who has been performing composure for 2 days and has run completely out of material. It echoed in the half-emptied ballroom with a clarity that was almost architectural. The sobbing carried. It moved through the remaining crowd, past the investors still filing out, past the journalists whose cameras were still live and still running. It reached Hargreaves, standing near the back wall with his untouched champagne glass. He set the glass down on the nearest surface. He watched Jessica's ring being placed into an evidence bag. He watched Jason being walked toward the service exit between 2 agents. His face held the specific expression of a man paying a debt he had owed for a long time and finding it both more and less than he had imagined. Bellamy moved to Olivia's side. He spoke quietly and without ceremony. The reinstatement documents had been filed with the corporate registry at 11 that morning, timed to activate upon confirmation of the SEC warrant. The warrant had been triggered by the encrypted data package Olivia had sent 40 hours ago from a pavement outside a penthouse using a burner phone from the lining of her shoe to a contact who had been waiting for exactly that signal. The holding company's trademark on the core algorithm was now the sole legal foundation of Omnitech's intellectual property. Every share sold tonight was contingent on that foundation. Every investor in the room had purchased equity in something that now had exactly one legal owner. Olivia listened. She nodded once. She closed the red folder. The ballroom was quieter now. The orchestra had not resumed. Half the crowd had gone. The golden IPO bell sat on its velvet stand at the center of the stage, untouched and gleaming, the one object in the room that had not moved through any of it. Olivia walked to the stage steps. She climbed them slowly. Her torn slacks left faint, wet marks on the polished wood. Her bleeding palm had stopped leaving marks on the folder, but the rust-colored stain remained on the lower corner, precise and permanent. She stood at the center of the stage. She looked out at what remained of the room. The journalists were still there. The cameras were still live. Hargreaves was still there, standing near the back wall, not leaving. A handful of investors who had not yet gone stood in small, quiet groups watching. She looked down at the golden IPO bell. It was heavy, solid, and worth considerably more than the plastic ID badge currently lying broken in the mud outside the entrance. She did not ring it. She did not touch it. She looked at it for a long moment with the expression of someone who has already gotten everything they came for. Behind her, through the service entrance, Jason Masters was being walked into the cold night air in handcuffs, his Rolex, scratched his stage, empty, his name about to become the subject of a very different kind of press coverage than the kind he had planned for this evening. Olivia picked up the golden bell. She set it down again gently in exactly the same position. She looked at the empty doorway where Jason had stood. "I told you I was too emotional for business, Jason."
Fiction. But that feeling of absolute, calculated justice? Unmatched. If you were in Olivia's shoes, holding those master patents, would you have waited for the live broadcast to expose him, or handled it privately in the boardroom? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe.